हरि करना।
We have discussed about normal distribution and standard normal distribution. So, but in reality, most of the data points won't take up these shapes. Then what shape they take, that's what we're going to discuss now. So despite the importance of normal distribution, standard normal distribution, just a minute. Yep. So despite the importance of 1 minute. So despite the importance of the normal distribution historically in statistics and in contrast to what the name would suggest, data is generally not normally distributed. That's what I want to say. Data is generally not normally distributed. So tail and skew, these are the two important terms that you should understand first. So tail the long narrow portion of a frequency distribution where relatively extreme values occur at low frequency, and whereas skew, I think most of the people might knew about this. Skew, where one tail of distribution is longer than the other. That's it. Simple, very simple definition. Where one tail of a distribution is longer than the other. So this will give you more understanding. Why I'm explaining this before I take up before I take you into the various types of distribution. I just want you to understand tail and skew, because these are the words I'm going to use further. So while the normal distribution is often appropriate and useful with respect to the distribution of errors and sample statistics, it typically does not characterize the distribution of raw data. This is very, very important. So normal distribution is often appropriate and useful with respect to the distribution of errors. Normal distribution fits very well with the distribution of errors and also sample statistics. Distribution of errors and distribution of sample statistics. Okay, but the issue here is, when it comes to, it typically does not characterize the distribution of a raw data. When it comes to raw data, it will not characterize it properly. Sometimes if it is raw data, sometimes the distribution, let me say, if it is raw data, sometimes what we get is the distribution is highly skewed. We call it as asymmetric. asymmetric, such as with income data, or the distribution can be discrete as with the binomial data. Examples of this are income data. Obviously income data is asymmetric because it's a Pareto analysis. You have Pareto analysis with you. Income data and binomial data, that is also very important. So these are all asymmetric, these are never symmetric. The best example of this asymmetric is Pareto analysis only. I hope you know that. So then so after that, both symmetric and asymmetric distributions may have long tails. That's one more issue. So the tails of distribution correspond to the extreme values. It could be small and large. So long tails and guarding against them are widely recognized in practical work. So one guy named Nassim Taleb has proposed the black swan theory, which predicts the anomalous events such as stock market crash are much more likely to occur than would be predicted by the normal distribution. So, so that's the reason these long tail distributions have come into the picture. So let me, okay. So now let's look into the what is a long tailed distribution itself. So in statistics, a long-tailed distribution is a distribution that has a long tail that you can see on the screen. This is what we call this a long tail that slowly tapers off towards the end of the distribution. So it turns out that this type of distribution appears all the time in different real world domains, and it has interesting implications. So here we will be discussing about, we'll take up several examples of long tail distributions in the real world and shares why long tail distributions are important. So let's look into our first example in this. This data is long tail distributions in book sales. One of the most well-known examples of long tail distribution is book sales. There are a few books that have sold hundreds of millions of copies, such as Harry Potter, The Lord of the Rings, The Da Vinci Code, etc. But most books sell less than 100 copies total. So if we create a bar chart to visualize the total sales of every book ever published, we would find that the chart exhibits a long tailed distribution. This is how a long tailed distribution looks. So, a few well known books have sold hundreds of millions of copies, and then there is a long tail of thousands upon thousands of books that have sold very few copies. So this is one example for a long tailed distribution. So most of the real world raw data takes up this shape. If you convert into the sampling distribution, probably it will take up the normal distribution. But however, if you work it upon raw data, it will end up in long tailed distribution as we have seen now. So now the second example that we can take up is long-tailed distribution in YouTube channels. Another well-known example of a long-tail distribution is the number of subscribers for YouTube channels. There are there are a handful of channels that have tens of millions of subscribers, but then there is a long tail of thousands upon thousands of channels that have less than 1,000 followers. Of course, my channel also falls into that category of just 100 or 120 subscribers. but I would like to give you the maximum. I would put all my efforts to give you very good content. I hope even if one watches that and if he gets the benefit, that's more than enough for me. I'm not doing it for money. I'm doing it for sake of the people who wants to learn, who wants to have a complete understanding about the data science from operations till deploying the model. Each inch of the stage I just want to explain. It's just I'm doing my karma. I'm doing my karma. I'm doing my dharma. Nothing else. I'm not expecting anything from you other than you getting the benefit out of my channel. So that's what another example that you can that we can see here. If you create a bar chart to visualize the total subscribers for each YouTube channel in existence, we would find that the chart exhibits a long-tailed distribution. And this is how it looks. A long tail of channels you have never heard of. And here on top, a well-known channel. And the third example that you can take up for this is a long tail distributions in city populations. So another example of a long tail distribution is the population size of cities in the United States. So there are a handful of cities that have millions of residents, but then there is a long tail of thousands upon thousands of cities that have fewer than 10,000 total residents. And that you can see on the screen. The same thing applies to Bengaluru. The same thing applies to see the villages around the Bengaluru. The Bengaluru will have a lakhs and lakhs on lakhs of residents. When it comes to the villages, you will have a few. So that's how it works. And you can take up many more examples for this. Even your Pareto analysis, if you take up a city and then if you plot the income levels of various people in that city, obviously 20% of people will hold most of the income and that in that most of the wealth in that city, and then remaining all people will fall into the next category. They will end up being in this tail. Most of the people will be ending up being in this tail. Only this 20% will be having or no possessing the most of the wealth in that city. So that's the reason the long tailed distributions really matter. They really matter. So why long tail distributions matter? Long tail distributions are particularly important to understand in business because they present an opportunity for a business model that revolves around making a few sales, a lot of products. For example, consider our example from book sales, earlier about the book sales. All of those books you have never heard of actually had customers interested in reading them, but most big retailers did not carry them in store because they did not sell many copies. However, when Amazon suddenly made it possible to buy these niches books online, they were able to sell a few copies of tens of thousands of different books from a long tail of the distribution. So the combined sales of all these books in the long tail actually amounted to significant properties. So another example, other business have also capitalized on this model. For example, eBay. I hope you heard about that. eBay has made it possible for hundreds of thousands of people to make a few sales of niche items. Since eBay takes a small cut of each sale, all of these sales from long tail sellers who only sell a couple of items per year actually adds up to significant profits for eBay. And at another example of a business who has capitalized on the long tail model is Netflix. So most TV shows and movies that are released only have small audiences, but by creating a platform where all of these niche long tail shows could be viewed a few times each, Netflix was able to build a massive base of subscribers who each subscribe to watch particular shows. So, in fact, there is an entire book written about the business model called The Long Tail by Chris Anderson. So, the whole book is about how making a few sales on lots of products can actually be a great business deal. So, that's the reason from data science perspective till business perspective, long tail distributions in when it comes to handling real world data is the king.